the suspension working, especially in the rear end on the seat here, but the lack of rubber is really evident when you got these big wheels. Welcome to the episode of Jay Leno's Garage. If you're wondering what the vehicle in front of you is, you are not alone. This won the Design and Style Award at the Quail. That's the premier motorcycle event here in, certainly in America at least, if not the world. First time out by a first-time motorcycle designer in a professional show like that. I love the fact that it's based on a very simple engine, the Honda single cylinder, although one of my favorite Hondas, the 500cc, I think is the most British single of all the bikes they built. But most people who do custom bikes, they want that big Harley V-twin, the Vincent V-twin, the JAP, SS100 from the Brus Superior. I love the fact that the engine is not the focal point of this bike. It's the whole overall design. Plus, you can look at this for 20 minutes and then suddenly see details. I was looking at it and then I realized, oh, what? There it is right there. Is that the tack or the Speedo right there? Where the headlights are, how the seat, it's just a fascinating piece, and it's easy to understand why it won. I love the fact that the engine is blacked out. It's not a lot of chrome. Your eye doesn't immediately go to that. This is designed by an automotive designer named Nicky Smart. He's worked for a number of major manufacturers, but I guess this is the first bike he's designed and put in a show. So let's meet him. Come on in, Nicky, how are you? Good to see you. Hey, really fantastic piece of work.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Really nice. You know, I love the fact that this is another creation that was done like 5 miles from the shop here. This has become sort of like Modena in Italy. There's all these little manufacturers. Singer is right around the corner. You're like 5 miles away. The Fast and the Furious guys build their cars just 3-4 doors down from us. So there's all kinds of interesting things going on here. So tell us about this. What was the idea behind it? How does the thought process work? The whole deal.
So my day-to-day job is, as you say, designing cars, but
Right.
I've always had a passion for motorbikes. And when I came to America, I discovered the sort of board track racing era that was really synonymous with American racing.
Right.
Nothing like that really happened in Europe. We had Brooklands, but the bikes that were developed, the proportion of the bikes, something about them just really captivated me. And it's interesting that you point out on the sort of volume of the engine within the bike. The kind of American sandwich, too much meat in there, is something that I always reference with those bikes with the V-twins. It's just so overpowering.
Right, right.
And there was an era where they were trying to reduce the crashes and lower the speed, and they chopped one of the cylinders off. They called the bikes pea shooters, and that was really what captivated me.
But see, that's kind of different between the Americans and English, because in America you can't put too much meat in the sandwich.
Apparently not.
Yeah, I remember the first time I was in England years ago, I ordered a turkey sandwich. I got 2 pieces of bread with one single slice of turkey, and I said, okay, and the guy's what? I thought it was a joke.
Well, here I asked them to take it out, and they're looking at me funny as though I'm asking for a discount.
It was like a pub sandwich, one slice of turkey. It just made me laugh. It's just a different way of thinking. But how does one go about designing this? Do you start with a sheet of paper? You just start working and it sort of comes, or do you have the whole thing worked out in your head before you finish, before you start, rather?
I mean, I come from a time in car design where we use computers a lot.
Right.
But when I began studying, everything was still very much sketching on paper. And so I still work very much artistically and sketch a thumbnail. I mean, the ideas for this bike, I was sat in an airport literally with just some scrubby little scribbles. And I had a vision of a sort of proportion that I wanted to build. And that was really the main sort of target for the bike. I wasn't really looking to do a retro bike, but there was something about those early 20s bikes, the way that the seat sits down beneath, kind of adjacent to this large diameter wheel. The bike's quite flat. You know, there's just something really romantic about that proportion. So I was just chasing that. And then as I found the tires and the engine, I was able to scan those in with a laser scanner and put those into the computer, and then start to position them to work out the proportion that I wanted.
I like the English idea of cocktail napkin design. You know, when Gordon Murray, the same sort of thing. I think he and Peter Stevens, somebody were at an airport. I don't have this quite right, but the initial sketches were on a cocktail napkin. What do you think of this? Oh, maybe a seat in the middle or anything. You know, and from that little acorn, this giant tree grows.
It sounds like a horrible cliche, but it really does start with a scribble. Because before you have the kind of composure to sit down and do an illustration where you're coloring in and spending hours, you need to know what you're drawing. So those rough drafts are really where you find the essence of the proportion.
Well, let's start with the dead center of the motorcycle. This logo, it's on both sides. What is that logo? What am I seeing there?
I was building a bike using a Honda engine, but I didn't want to claim it was anything that it wasn't. So it was going to be a scratch-built bike, and I was trying to think of a cool name for a bike company, and I kept racking my brain, and of course drawing logos for synonyms, and I came up with a bike company, ABC, and it just fell into a logo really well. So straightforward, but
very good.
kind of tongue-in-cheek.
Cool. And again, I looked at this for 5 minutes before I realized it's just a tack or a Speedo.
So that's just a Speedo there.
Speedo, okay.
Yeah, this engine is relatively basic, as you noted. I mean, it is, and that's one of the reasons I picked it, because there's not a lot of adornments.
Right.
The engine casings are very simple, but there's no Speedo drive, and the 6-volt system, so it was kind of tricky to add on a lot of electronics to this bike, and I just wanted to keep it basic.
It's a 6-volt system.
6-volt system, yeah. I think they changed in 82.
What year is this engine?
81.
81, okay. I love the fact that it all goes in a straight line. You don't have two carburetors coming out the side. I mean, is that deliberate as well? I like the fact that everything is contained within the width of the tank.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting idea too.
It's another aesthetic from the sort of 20s, 30s bikes where they were these single spar frames. I mean, very bicycle derived, obviously, and the tanks were often either hanging underneath or they were split in this case. And having a split tank gave me the opportunity to pocket that out and hide all the electronics, the battery, and in this case, the front shock absorber as well, just to get all of the electrics, all of the black boxes of mystery out of the way so that the bike had a relatively clean aesthetic.
I mean, I love the fact that I could never design something, but I know what I like when I see it. And this is a classic case of that. Yes, that's exactly what I want, but I had no idea what I wanted until you gave it to me with this. This was fantastic. Tell me about this front suspension system. Even this is unique.
You've got a lot of bikes that have girder type suspension.
Right,
sort of
the early Vincents.
Yeah,
certainly.
I mean, that arrangement was very common until everything sort of went to the telescopic fork. But one interesting development happened through Norman Hossack, who basically took a girder type arrangement and I think improved it. And this is called a Hossack suspension arrangement that BMW then used as inspiration for their Duolever.
Right.
But it's essentially double wishbones, and then the fork is an upright. And so the actual steering happens out on the front of the fork. Instead of a girder, everything rotates.
Right, that's great. Now, is this a system you bought and adapted, or did you design to make these pieces?
Everything is made. Other than the engine and the tires and the grips, everything is made.
And what size wheel is that?
So this is a 26-inch tire.
Okay.
So the overall diameter is about 29. So again, I was looking at those early bikes that had 28-inch OD tires.
Right.
This was a tire that came out in the sort of mid-2000s for chopper bikes, like bagger bikes that run the very small wide rear and the tall front. But no wheels were available at the time. So this was the starting point for the project. I had to basically work out how I could make a wheel before I knew I could use that proportion.
See, I never quite got the chopper thing. Why take a motorcycle, make it slower, handle worse, more uncomfortable, and only look good when it's sitting?
You said it.
You know, I like a bike that looks good in moving. This looks like it's moving right now. And that's kind of the fun part about it. It looks like it's going 50 miles an hour.
Well, that was really what excited me when I saw the pictures of the riders on the board track bikes, the way that they looked stretched out, and they looked like they were in a really dynamic position from the get-go. So I was really trying to build a bike that wouldn't just look great for someone that's 5'3", literally a jockey, but someone our size could climb on. And for us, the architecture would stretch us out, and it would give the bike a sense of potency, and it have that same dynamicism.
You know, I was fortunate to know Jim Davies. You know that name?
I don't know.
He was one of the famous board track riders, and he lived to be, I think, a little over 100. And I met him. Obviously, he was an old man. But he ran in the 20s, and you ran with no brakes.
So brave, yeah.
And no throttle, just wide open. The only way you slowed down was you hit kill switch, and then you take your hand up. And he told me he said at races, there'd be like 10 or 15 girls with tweezers, and they were nurses. And when you fell, you'd roll on the boards, and you'd pick up 1,500, 2,000
It sounds like a joke, but it really is remarkable.
And they would come out and they would do this, and they would pull all the splinters out of you. It's just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just crazy. I mean, it wasn't outlawed, but so many people were killed, and they were going 100 miles an hour with no brakes and no throttle. I mean, just think about that.
Well,
you come to a corner and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's kind of the biggest theatre, I think, at the time. 100,000 people were watching those races, so it was obviously a spectacle.
In fact, where the Beverly Wilshire Hotel is right now, that was the biggest board track in North America. It was right there in the middle of Beverly Hills.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, just an enormous thing. And like you said, there was no, movie theaters were fairly new, but that's what people did for entertainment. 100,000 people would show up, and just crazy, and guys made big money.
Yeah.
You know, they got $25,000, which was what? Would it be $500,000 now?
Well, they're like the gladiators of their time,
Yeah,
right, on
yeah.
those bikes.
Well, this does harken back to that whole era. And this seat is interesting too. This is carbon fiber?
Yeah, so it's cantilevered off the back of the frame, so that the seat actually does have flexibility before it then starts to compress the suspension.
Right.
And then it also hides the air shock underneath, so that the lines of the bike, it reads somewhat like a rigid bike, but it still has suspension.
And the fenders are carbon fiber or carbon fiber, it looks like.
Everything's carbon fiber.
Right.
When I was building this bike, I thought about trying to learn to do sheet metal work. I mean, I'm a fabricator as I grew up as a kid, and I loved doing sheet metal work and tubular manifolds and things, but I was thinking back in the 50s and 60s when aluminum was just starting to be used, if they had had carbon fiber, that's what they would have used.
Right,
so
right.
I just sort of embraced all the technologies that I would use building cars.
Now the wheels, did you make the wheels as well?
Yes.
Wow.
They're large diameter, so obviously the gyroscopic effect is a concern. So I initially made a tool and laid up a unidirectional carbon fiber rim just to keep it as light as possible. But I really didn't have the machinery to do any final machining, so it ended up being a bit of a disaster. So this ended up being two 21-inch steel wheels cut, and then I made some match tools, pressed those rims out, chopped them and welded them together to make a 26.
I mean, it's amazing to me. And even the idea that you know these wheels are secure enough that you can actually drive them, because designing, that's another whole art in itself. It's pretty amazing. I love the use of, it looks like gold, but it's orange, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's an anodized, I mean, the inspiration is definitely a proportion from a bygone era, but I wanted the bike to have a much more modern feel in terms of the details, like a sort of modern race bike. So the anodized, I didn't want too much decoration, but the anodized to show the aluminum parts.
So carbon fiber tank, fender, what does it weigh? Let me guess. I'm guessing it weighs 360.
Yeah, I think it's like 330, something like that,
Okay,
low 300s,
okay.
yeah.
Wow. I mean, it must move along pretty good.
33 horsepower, so it's not the most powerful engine, but yeah, it's
No,
relatively
but
light.
33 horsepower is pretty quick.
Yeah, it will move you along.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And even the headlight is fan. Look where the headlight is here. I mean, I thought, well, I couldn't drive it at night. Oh yes, there, the headlight's right there. And I'm sure that's more than adequate as a headlight, isn't it?
Yeah, these are two projector beams, LEDs, and I liked them. I mean, again, it's a bit of a nod to the sort of 20s, 30s flat track bikes that had this kind of number plate down on there, and it allowed the fork to stay open without headlights crammed in there so that you could see the mechanism.
How many failed designs do you go through before you come up with this? I mean, did you have other things that didn't work and you went to something else? Or is this always your vision? This is exactly as you envisioned?
I see how a lot of bike builders build bikes. I mean, seeing like the biker build-off shows and things, and they were sort of coming with an engine and a frame, and you know, they'll have these basic pieces that already define things for them, and then they'll join the dots. With this, because I was building everything from scratch, I didn't really have any stakes in the ground, so laying it out on the computer really was key.
Yeah.
Once I got those things in space, then I was pretty much comfortable with the proportion. I knew exactly what I would get, and then it came out obviously looking exactly like the computer model.
And when you have a bike builder show, you have to have a machine that makes sparks. That's important. You have to just keep grinding something.
Anything.
Just so it throws sparks. Every commercial break, there has to be sparks coming out of the thing. That's the first part of it. So tell us about now, even on the front disc, you decided, I'm not going to do a round disc. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah, these are actually off of a ZX-10R. So I modified the calipers slightly, but the rotors, I basically, at the time I knew I wouldn't be able to make the top hat to hold the rotor. It was something I just didn't have the confidence to do. So I found a rotor that had the approximate spoke design that I wanted, and then I matched the contours of the hub to go with the rotor.
Now see, I would have thought maybe since everything else here is perfectly round, that almost these would be perfectly round.
It might look better with a completely round disc. Yeah, you could be right.
No, I'm just wondering, because it seems like big round, little, I mean, proportion. That's why I was curious as to why you chose this sort of rotor, just because it's different. Maybe just a round rotor would look too plebeian.
Yeah, honestly, that's one of the things I didn't really give a great deal of thought to, but you could be right.
And all this here, these rose, all this is just beautifully done. And obviously you designed this piece here, so it's all within
one of the great advantages of building everything on the computer is once you have the data, you can use rapid prototype processes. So where you would typically be hammering sheet metal and working very hands-on, I could send off data in the case of these pieces here and have parts printed. So these are fused plastic, like an ABS nylon. These are investment cast in aluminum. I also investment cast the dropouts, all these lugs on the frame. So I basically made silicon molds from wax printed prototypes. So it's quite a different process to how a custom bike is traditionally made.
Now, rather than a big single, with a single port, I mean, did you choose this motor because it had dual ports and you could have a muffler on each side? As opposed to a BSA Gold Star?
Yeah, it was one of the things that I was adamant I wanted to find was these parallel. I was originally looking at using a twin cylinder.
Right.
And these parallel primaries coming out of the engine either side, just like the tanks.
Right.
And then when I came across the Honda XL 500 engine, that is a single cylinder but a 4-valve head, it still has the twin primaries. So it was nice and balanced. So aesthetically, it went with the bike.
Oh, the stoplight is here is under the seat. I just noticed that for the first time.
Yep.
Nice. That's nicely done as well.
Yeah, again, so it's not out there prominently in the wind.
Right.
It's hidden away, and as you've noticed, it's a kind of third reed. So
Right.
it's not detracting for this kind of cleanliness of the bike.
Did you find that making a chain guard would be too much adornment, too much adding on to it? Why no chain guard? Any other reason for that?
I was looking a lot at race bikes, and I just loved, I mean, all through eras, race bikes are stripped down. They're really elemental. There's nothing unnecessary. There's no boxes to hold things. You know, everything double duties. It's really efficient. So I really didn't want anything there that looked, I guess, kind of like a production bike. I wanted it to look like a more of a race bike aesthetic.
And this is a standard, like a K&N, correct?
Yep. So it's a standard carburetor. I mean, I haven't really worked the engine. I mean, the proportion of the bike was the thing I was most obsessed about, and the high-end performance is really not the pursuit for me.
I mean, did you see yourself designing, because this is the only part that you didn't design, correct?
Yeah, well, it's funny, a friend of mine, every time he sees the bike, he asks me whether I finished the airbox yet.
Are you working on airbox?
I'm sketching one, and I might well do an airbox to go in there. It's interesting, the engine, the graphic of that V-twin.
Right.
For a lot of people, when they see this bike, they feel like there's something missing there.
Yeah.
And it's that second cylinder, that's something there. And so I may do an airbox that helps to fill in a little bit of that.
Now, would the airbox have any orange in it?
I think I would get the airbox in, and then maybe use some vinyl tape just to have a look and see. And if I like it, then paint it in.
And like I said, I love the fact that the engine and the cases are blacked out. Your eye doesn't immediately go to the, I mean, that's like you said, the focal point of any motorcycle. Whoa, look at that engine.
Well, especially with custom bikes, the kind of the diamond-faced fins and the kind of pizzazz of the engine. I really wanted to dial that down so that you just read the lines of the bike.
And I love the fact you haven't modified the engine at all. That's just to make it go.
Yeah, just to keep it honest, and I don't want to decorate something that's actually really nicely designed. And I actually carried on the design aesthetic of the engine with the brackets around the engine so that it almost looks like a continuation of that original part.
Gotcha. Is this all your brake fluid?
That's it, yeah.
That's it.
I mean, it only moves a very small amount.
Well, that's true.
So you can see if it's, getting too low.
So I need a little 10 cc's and you're there.
Yeah.
What's the piece you're most proud of? If you had to pick one piece of the bike that really stands out for you, which one is it?
I think the front suspension. This arrangement, it's so kind of interesting, and most people when they first see the bike are drawn to see how it actually works. I think pretty much every modern bike uses a telescopic fork.
Right.
And it's often a unique aesthetic that doesn't really match the rest of the bike. It's just a given that you're going to see those two stanchions, and then you execute the design elsewhere. With this arrangement, I could continue the aesthetic design of the rest of the bike all the way through the front forks as well.
See, I agree. I think the average motorcycles would pick this, and the average person would pick the seat, probably. If you're not a biker, this is all what every motorcycle is. Whereas this is just pure design. That's what's really cool. I think to the average, that seat is so neat, but I have to admit, I go with you here because I love the fact that my eye did not immediately catch the speedo. It took me,
it's kind of hidden in there.
Yeah, because I was looking at it like here, and there it is, look at that. It's so really well done. And the switch gear, what is that off of? Is that
It's actually just proprietary. So I needed a little switchgear block, and again, I could just draw up the data. A friend of mine has got a homemade rapid prototype machine that he made for like $1,000, and you can just print it out.
And tell us these two filler caps.
Yeah, so these are both brass, all brass threaded. So everything is all handmade and hand machined. Just the twin tanks, they're twin vented. The tanks are separate, and then they collect en route to the carburetor.
Okay.
So they self-level essentially.
Okay. Oh, so when you fill this one, it will fill that.
It
one.
will,
Okay.
yeah.
So is one a dummy tank, or are they both open?
No, they're both open actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, keeping it honest.
Yeah.
This swing arm. Did you make the swing arm?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, it's the same. If you look at the section on the fork, I really like the idea of these deep, narrow sections, and I try to continue that same feel with the rear swing arm.
Okay. Wow. Just very cool. What are your mufflers off of?
I look to use off-the-shelf parts, but I grew up, my father had a shop making exhaust manifolds and systems for all kinds of things. So I grew up in a workshop welding. So that was the one part I really wanted to do.
Well, I love the fact that you put mufflers on it, because most people, they just put straight pipes and it's just easier. I like the fact that you make the concession that it's...
Well, it was another aesthetic that I think speaks to the kind of power and potency of the bike. When you look at the bike, I mean, that silencer, especially the way it megaphones out, you know, it contributes a lot. So I think to just have a straight pipe, it would look kind of unfinished.
Right. And the brake calipers are?
They're off, everything's off of a ZX-10R.
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted a relatively large diameter with 4-pot calipers.
Wow, gee, it's, you know, and just from every angle, it really is beautiful. And for lane splitting in California, it's the greatest.
Relatively narrow, yeah.
It's the greatest bike ever, yeah. It really, I love the way the two exhaust pipes are exactly equally distant from the down tube. I mean, that gives a nice aesthetic that you don't notice right away. Takes a second. That's really cool. And again, the blacked out engine is genius, because there's a thing to just make everything shiny in the center to draw the eye away. I love the fact that the eye is drawn outward rather than inward.
Yeah, the glossy finishes are on the wheels. So I mean, the wheels are a big part of the aesthetic, but then everything is consistent with those.
I love that these, what do you call them, roach joints here?
Yep.
Are not black. I like the fact you get to see the working part of the motorcycle.
Yeah, it's a little,
so
special.
You see those move as you turn it. Yeah, it's really something. It's really neat. We gotta fire it up. I wonder, is this something we can go around the block on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's give it a shot.
You're the test pilot.
I'm the test pilot. Oh yeah, and this looks real comfortable. Yeah. Well, I can feel the suspension working, especially in the rear end on the seat here. But the lack of rubber is really evident when you got these big wheels. Same reason the 21-inch tires on my Tesla don't ride as well as the 19s. But you know, with a set of proper modern tires with a little more compliance to them, it's not uncomfortable. It seems like, it looks like a small bike, but it's not. I find this riding position okay. Obviously, we're not doing anything crazy with the bike because it's a prototype. He took 10 years to build, but everything works. Suspension, brakes, reliable, handles nice, extremely lightweight. I mean, it's the most lightweight bike I've been on in a long time. It wasn't a, 125 or something. Well, the look on your face, I pulled away. The thing I'd taken your woman, you're like,
I'm just happy you're back.
No, it's great. Well, obviously, the tires are way too hard for, I mean, every bump, you don't get any absorption.
To your question about pressure earlier, it may just be that they're too hard. I've really not developed it much.
But you know what? I can feel the suspension working. I can see it work. The seat is not that uncomfortable. It's actually okay. No, it's great. And it's so light, it feels like a 125 or a 250, you know?
It's really interesting seeing you on the bike because you're 6 foot something and yet you're stretched out. You've got the same composure as those jockeys back in the 20s.
Yeah, but it's quite comfortable. It's not bad. I mean, obviously hours of this would be backbreaking, especially at my age. But no, it's great. And I mean, the looks, everybody thumbs up. What's that? Cameras are coming out, they're going along. Nice job.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations, really. You give up that car thing. You should go into bikes. That car thing's a dead end.
I'll mix them up for the time being and see how I go.
And thank you for bringing us by, and well deserved. And you know, the greatest thing about it, it actually works. Because a number of bikes we said, hey, we'd love to have them on the show. you can't really ride it because nothing's connected, there's no internals. So the fact that you make a working, running prototype, that it works perfectly, the lights work, everything works. Is there a horn on it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was. Before you turned off, it was.
Yeah, it makes its electricity. I get it. Very cool. Well, once again, I can't thank you enough.
Yeah,
That
no,
was
I
a real
appreciate
thrill.
it. Thank you,
Terrific.
Jay.
Very cool, very cool. Check out his website.